a rabbit with a torn ear, is found in a hollow under an old tree. An old swing sways by itself every night, even though no child is on it, and every forgotten toy demands a child to take its place. Welcome back to the Whisper Horror Channel, where we step across the thin line between memory and curse. If you've ever done something cruel to a child, and no one knew, then perhaps tonight you should listen to this entire story. Don't forget to click follow, comment on how you feel, and share this story with anyone planning a getaway with old friends. Because in tonight's story, Memory Island will follow Selene, Imogen, and their childhood friends as they return to an island once marked by their old games. But this time, someone has never left, and it's still waiting for someone to play with. Late summer wind swept into the small apartment, carrying the faint scent of dusty sunlight and the yellow dreaminess of a city sunset. Imogen was hunched over her backpack, her face half hidden in the window's shadow, her shoulder-length hair trembling slightly with a hint of anxious breathing. Cassidy hopped over, flicked her arm, and joked loudly, "Imogen, wake up. The memory trip has begun. Remember to play hard. Promise." No one answered. Imogen forced a smile, her eyes still fixed on the unfinished checklist. In the living room, Bryce and Maura's voices rang out endlessly. "Damn it, who took my towel? Try finding it in your messy backpack first." Dorian tinkered with his camera, mumbling as he aimed the lens. Day one of the amateur vlogger's trip to the ghost island. You'll see who pretends to be tough, and who's the biggest scaredy cat. Laughter, shouts, and the clamor of everyday life mixed with the outward excitement. While in the corner of the bedroom, Selene stood silent, her fingers tracing the edge of a dusty dark red box. For a split second, her eyes met the small mirror on the dresser. Inside, Selene's face was blurry, next to a deep dark shadow. She froze, her hand still on the red box, then quietly closed her backpack. Maura opened the bedroom door, adding a comment just loud enough for Selene to hear. "I still remember, last time we were on this island, I dreamt of a little girl standing outside our tent watching us. Her eyes were all wet, like she'd been crying all night." No one replied. Imogen watched from a distance, her eyes quietly following the fleeting change of expression at the corner of Selene's lips. The initial atmosphere was ordinary, about getting together and youthful memories, but a cold spark of nameless doubt and fear had crept in early. The SUV rumbled down the smooth asphalt highway, a cabin full of laughter, lively yet mixed with a heaviness no one dared to name. "Look, the island is getting closer. Isn't everyone excited?" Cassidy cheered, turning to film a story and fool around with Dorian. From the back seat, Imogen spoke hesitantly. "Are you sure you want us to go back to that island, Selene? Back then we heard so many hair-raising stories." Selene replied dismissively, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe. We only came to play once when we were little." The wind whipped through the car window, messing up Bryce's hair. Maura threw her phone onto the floor, pouting. "The signal's weak. Can't get a network. It's really crazy to come to this wilderness." Dorian conveniently swept his camera over to Selene, but whenever the lens was pointed at her, the camera suddenly flickered, and the screen went dark. "That's weird. The battery must be acting up because of the air." A salty taste of anxiety began to seep under the jokes. The dinghy slowly cut through the waves on the lake. The scenery was blurred by the fine rain, and in the middle of the lake, a pitch-black object appeared, a small bird, its wet feathers motionless. Bryce grimaced. "That's creepy. Even birds can't survive here." Imogen crouched down, her feet shrinking back when she saw the bird's body suddenly sink to the bottom of the water in a flash, without a trace. Upon arrival, Selene was the last to step off, her eyes vacant, her feet quietly moving towards a clump of old bamboo. No one noticed, but under her feet, the ground had slightly swollen, the faint traces of an ancient hole that had been carelessly filled. The smell of damp grass mixed with kitchen smoke seeped into every strand of hair, and everyone quickly set up camp at the edge of the forest. One person pulled ropes, another made a fire, someone else gathered wood, and others rolled up their sleeping bags. Amidst the busy work, the intricate relationships between them gradually revealed many hidden layers. Cassidy leaned close to Selene, laughing hesitantly. "Hey, this time whoever dares to run away first is the hero of the ghost island." Selene just gave a faint smile, avoiding her friend's gaze. "If you like to pretend, go ahead and play, but honestly, no one wants to be the one to leave first." Maura sat striking a match, telling a shaky story. "My parents told me that a little girl drowned here a long time ago. They said no one ever found her body." Cassidy burst out laughing. "Careful, a lost ghost girl might end up in your tent with you tonight." Imogen quietly observed, suddenly realizing that Selene wasn't laughing. Her friend's face was pale, her deeply set eyes taut like a violin string. While the group was setting up camp, Dorian rummaged under a tree, picking up a muddy children's woven bracelet. Someone dropped their childhood souvenir over here. Selene glanced over quickly, her face suddenly serious. Throw it away. We shouldn't keep things that were left behind on this island. Dorian gave a faint laugh. What are you talking about? I'm going to sell this online. The wind whistled through the tent flaps, the lake's surface so still you could clearly hear the sound of a young branch breaking somewhere in the woods. No one dared to admit that they were slowly getting goosebumps all over their body. Night fell like a rough blanket covering their eyes, and the campfire flickered before quickly dying out from the cold air sweeping in from the lake. Dorian still had his camera attached, busying himself in the bushes, planning to vlog his first night on the island. In the weak light from the screen, Selene sat by the tent, her hands curled around a small cloth that had been stained by time, her lips moving slightly as if calling out a name from memory. Cassidy snuggled into her tent, whispering a joke. Whoever snores loudly tonight is definitely going to turn into a sleeping ghost. Bryce tried to shout loudly to drown out his own pounding heart. Don't scare us with that nonsense. It's just us out here. In Imogen's tent, she was half asleep, half awake, hearing the faint giggling and whimpering of a small child coming from the reed bank. She sat up, scanning the tent with her flashlight, only to see Mora and a layer of coiled darkness completely silent. Imogen's heart pounded violently, a part of her mind trying to tell her it was just the sound of insects. When everything settled down outside, Dorian's camera captured a scene. Before the screen went black, a small shadow quietly glided past. In that instant, its face turned towards the lens, blurry and cold as morning mist, its eyes hollowed out with endless longing. Early sunlight flickered through the treetops, the lake's surface dappled with grey light. Imogen slowly opened her eyes, feeling a strange coldness on the back of her neck even though it was only early summer. She peeked out of the tent, her breath catching as she saw a line of tiny footprints pressed deep into the damp ground right up to the edge of the tent. Imogen silently ran her finger over each print, the hairs on her arms standing on end with unease. She went back inside and called out loudly, "Is anyone coming out to see this?" Bryce laughed, taunting her. "It's probably just a squirrel or a raccoon looking for food. No need to be so stressed." Mora quietly pulled her blanket over herself, grumbling under her breath. "Last night I kept hearing something running around the tent, but it's probably nothing." As the group gathered around the makeshift stove, Selene stood silently by the lake, her eyes fixed on a spot in the water as if hypnotized. Her hand trembled slightly, her heels sinking deeper and deeper into the mud without her noticing. Dorian waved. "Selene, do you want breakfast or not? You're going to catch a cold standing like that." Selene started, pulled her hand back, and tripped on a rock, nearly falling face first into the water. Cassidy teased, "Are you dreaming of someone who drowned again, Selene?" Mora suddenly found the children's bracelet. The one Selene had told them to throw away last night had reappeared in her jacket pocket. Mora was annoyed. "Who's playing a trick and putting things in my jacket?" "Dorian, you're not still kidding around, are you?" Dorian held up both hands, annoyed. "I swear I didn't touch it." No one answered. Imogen quietly looked at Selene, her expression slowly changing from sympathy to deep suspicion. She was starting to feel that something was beyond coincidence. The atmosphere was still awkward when Cassidy ran over, clapping her hands. "Come to the western beach with me. Let's have a sandcastle building contest and see who wins." Dorian and Bryce eagerly agreed, and Mora followed reluctantly. Imogen gave the excuse of a headache to stay behind. In reality, her heart was pounding from a bad feeling, and the haunting image of the tiny footprints still hadn't left her mind. On the beach, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a cold silver color on the loose sand. Everyone was shouting and scooping up sand, laughing as if they were children again. Selene just sat on the side, lightly scratching the hem of her skirt, her eyes distant. "This place, we used to play fake burial games here. One person would lie down, and the other would cover them with sand, but sometimes no one would come to dig them up." Everyone froze. Then Cassidy burst into a laugh. "I'll play the dead body. Come on, you guys, help me bury myself up to my neck. Let's see who dares to pull me out." Laughter filled the air again. They all covered Cassidy with sand, leaving only her face exposed. Her lips curled in a teasing, provocative smile, her eyes shining with that spooky excitement so common in adolescence. Selene suddenly backed away, her voice soft as a breeze. "Don't come out yet." The game ended, and everyone ran to the water's edge to wash their hands, but Cassidy insisted on staying buried to scare them all one more time. When they came back, the group was stunned. The beach was empty, with only a deep hollow, the empty sand pit and a long drag mark leading to the water's edge. Mora's scream pierced the sky, making Imogen jump and run to the beach instinctively. Bryce trampled the grass by the lake, his voice hoarse as he called, "Cassidy, Cass, stop joking around." Imogen's eyes darted everywhere, and then, as if compelled, she walked towards the muddy bank near the reeds. A piece of pink cloth peeking out from under the mud made her freeze. Imogen pulled gently. A cold, stiff patch of skin was revealed, the sleeve of Cassidy's shirt. She bit her lip and pulled hard. The rest of Cassidy's body was buried under the thick mud, her head twisted unnaturally, her mouth wide open and full of sand, her eyes wide with terror. The whole group froze. Mora fainted, and Dorian trembled and shouted, She probably just fell into a sand trap or got a cramp, right?" Imogen shook her head, her eyes dry and blank. There are no footprints around it, no signs of a struggle. The air was thick with sobs, and the sound of rain started to patter. Selene stood silent, her lips moving. "It wasn't me. I just thought, what if back then?" The group's camaraderie was almost shattered, and each person retreated to their tent in a state of shock. Bryce's face was beet red, his fist clenched, yelling at Selene. "What the hell is wrong with you, Selene? You've been weird ever since we got here, babbling about all these crazy things, and then something happens." Dorian took out his phone, secretly replaying the footage from their sand game. Suddenly, in one frame, there was a moment when Cassidy, buried motionless in the sand, abruptly looked up, staring directly behind Selene, and then sank again, even though only Selene's shadow was clearly standing there. No one could explain it. Imogen found Selene, confronting her friend. "You said some really strange things this morning. Are you hiding something?" Selene hugged her head, trembling, her eyes squinted as if she was enduring intense pain. An image flashed in her mind, a messy-haired little girl, her face smeared with sand, being pushed into a hole in the middle of a circle of children. Selene whispered a name, then tried to change the subject. "I have a headache. It's probably just from lack of sleep." Suspicion, like a layer of thick fog, gradually enveloped Selene. The more she tried to deny it, the more the memories swirled, revealing the truth that Cassidy's death was not a mere coincidence, but seemed to be tightly linked to their childhood games, and the guilt Selene was hiding. Night fell on the island without a sound. Everyone huddled in their tents, cold sweat beading on their foreheads despite the strangely freezing air. Imogen, unable to sleep, quietly went out to the beach under the pale moonlight. Unexpectedly, she discovered a sandcastle that had just been finished. On top was a small, mud-covered doll, with two empty, deep-set eye sockets. Imogen's whole body shook uncontrollably. She was certain no one in the group had the energy or courage to play such a cruel trick anymore. In her ears, the faint, sorrowful laughter of a child echoed. Morning mist seeped through the tent flaps, colder than any morning before. Imogen sat slumped by the edge of the fire pit, her eyes dark from lack of sleep, her heart filled with overwhelming worry. The atmosphere on the island was so heavy that every plant and every gust of wind seemed to be lurking. Imogen whispered, her voice like a broken note, "We can't stay here anymore. We have to leave right away." Bryce frowned, his voice strained. "How? The boat only has enough gas for one trip. Who do you plan to leave behind? Are you going to call for help with sheer willpower?" Dorian clutched his phone tightly, pressing and pressing, but only the no-signal icon appeared. Mora hugged her head, her eyes glaring directly at Selene. "This all started with your mouth. If you hadn't kept rambling about that drowned girl, we probably would have been home by now." Selene couldn't argue back. Her hands trembled, constantly drawing circles and question marks on the ground, the white chalk lines blending into the withered grass. She mumbled unconsciously, her eyes staring into the distance like a sleepwalker. Imogen approached, gently placing a hand on Selene's shoulder. "Selene, are you okay?" Selene started, her eyes blank. "I just remember the wind, the sound of the swing hitting the tree trunk." Dorian cut in, trying to be rational. "Let's split up to check things out. Whoever wants to get ready to escape, come with me, and whoever wants to stay at the camp, stay. No one is to leave the area on their own." Selene jumped up, her eyes pleading towards Imogen. "Let me go with you," but Mara blocked her, her voice cold. "No, Selene stays with me. Who knows what she'll do out there?" Everyone was in a panic, anxiety etched on every face. They all felt the fear, but no one dared to admit they were scared. On the other side of the forest, Selene froze. In a flash, she saw an old swing swaying in the wind between the ancient trees. But the swing wasn't there when they arrived. Was it? The rope, the worn wooden seat, or was it a fragment of a distant memory returning? Hazy yellow sunlight slanted through the lush canopy, and Mara tiptoed away from the camp, a cigarette in her mouth, her eyes searching for a moment of peace amidst her chaotic mind. She wandered along the edge of the forest, pretending not to hear Imogen's cries of "Mara, come back,"
echoing in the wind. Suddenly, she stopped in front of a naturally curved tree branch, where an old rope swing was hanging. Mara was bewildered. Where did this thing come from? Who's playing with this here? No one answered, only the wind blowing, making the swing sway gently, one rhythm after another. A flickering memory surfaced. Long ago, under the trees by the lake, a strange little girl once stood quietly watching Selene and Mara play on the swing. The child asked to play, and it was Mara who had let out a shrill laugh. Not everyone gets to play. You're so dirty. You're lucky you even get to watch. The playful tone was mixed with a child's malice, and a fleeting sense of guilt she thought was buried deep. Back in reality, Mara took a step back, intending to leave, but her foot got caught. A rope suddenly flew out from nowhere, wrapping tightly around her neck with an unexpected tug. Mara struggled, her feet kicking wildly in the air, her fingernails tearing at the skin of her neck, and the more she struggled, the tighter the knot got. In the corner of her tear-filled eye, Mara saw a distorted, pale face, a neck full of bruises. The little girl's eyes flashed with resentment. Unable to blink, it looked at her not with accusation, but like an unchangeable sentence for an unforgivable mistake. The swing rope let go, and Mara's body fell freely through the thin air, crashing through layers of dry leaves before falling silent. At the same time, back at the camp, Imogen and Dorian returned to find Selene huddled in the grass, blood trickling from her nose and the corner of her mouth, her hands clutching a small torn piece of cloth with a mud-stained blue elephant printed on it. Imogen frantically helped her friend up. "Selene, wake up. What happened?" Selene opened her eyes, her voice hoarse. "I see. I used to play with that little girl. She was so gentle. Once she fell off the swing, I didn't help her up, because I was afraid of being scolded. I left her lying there." Tears welled up in Selene's eyes, her hands trembling so much that she tore the piece of cloth. Dorian sat down, whispering, "Something is killing us. It's not a person, but it's not like an ordinary ghost either." Bryce, in the corner of his tent, was in a panic, shouting and crying. "You guys think I'm crazy, but last night I really saw a small hand reaching into the tent, scratching my chin. It was so cold I couldn't get up." A horrible shriek echoed from the forest. The group rushed over. Imogen ran first, the soles of her feet pressing into the rotten leaves without feeling any pain. On a curved tree branch, Mara was hanging upside down from the swing rope, her neck bent at an angle, her legs dangling lifelessly in the thick air. Across her chest was a crudely carved incision, the blood dark. Not everyone gets to play. Dorian dropped his camera, his eyes vacant. Imogen shouted, "Enough, enough. Dorian, you said this would be fun. You said you were coming here to film a vlog. Is this a clip from hell?" Bryce collapsed at the base of a tree, mumbling hoarsely, "I once read that a child went missing on this island. No one ever found the body, and no one was ever charged." Selene passed out, and Imogen knelt down next to Mora's body, her hands trembling as she dug through the layers of grass, looking for a sign of life. But Mora's body was already cold, her face contorted by a final terror. That night, a violent storm brewed. In her stupor, Selene dreamt again of the swing swaying in the dark woods. Below it was the little girl standing alone, blood oozing from her mouth, her eyes wide open, whispering, "You promised you wouldn't leave me." Selene woke up, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. She clearly felt an icy hand squeezing her neck from behind, tiny nails digging into her skin. Imogen opened the tent, her flashlight beam trembling across the space. There was nothing there but the echoing breath of the deserted island. For a moment, everything seemed to blur between the present, memory, and a never-ending nightmare. The sun rose palely, casting a hazy grey light on the camp. The air was thick with despair. Imogen stumbled to start a fire, her eyes dry and blank as she looked at each person with a restless, uneasy gaze. "We have to get off this island now. Everyone, pack your things and let's go to the motorboat." Dorian looked at his phone. The signal bar's empty, his tense face biting his lip. "Maybe there's a signal around the lake. Let's just try." Bryce stormed off. "As long as everyone goes together, no one gets left behind." Selene sat huddled on the ground, her face in her hands, not saying or moving. The three of them helped each other through the thick reeds, mud covering their calves, forest leaves hissing overhead, and every broken branch making a spine-chilling cracking sound. Every step became heavy, and Imogen kept looking back, feeling as if someone was always following them. However, after almost an hour of walking, their backs soaked with sweat, the group suddenly arrived back at their original camp. The tent, the burnt-out fire, the footprints around them. Bryce froze, screaming, "No way! I walked the right way. How did we end up back here?" Imogen collapsed, her hands trembling as she recognized the mark on the tree trunk, the exact symbol she had just carved to mark their path. Dorian tried again, using a knife blade to carve a symbol, and the group continued, following the water's edge. This time it was the same. Every path, every effort, was a vicious circling fate, bringing the group back to their starting point. Bryce threw the knife, wailing in desperate tears. "What the hell is keeping us here? Someone help me." Back at the camp, Selene sat with her legs drawn up, her hands wiping the mud from her skirt. A dizzy spell came over her, and she suddenly spotted a rusty, flimsy tin box sitting right in the middle of the tent. It clearly didn't belong to anyone in the group. She opened the lid, and a torn-eared grey plush rabbit quietly appeared, still streaked with mud, and the smell of old mildew. Selene's eyes blurred with tears, and memories suddenly came flooding back. She had once snatched that rabbit from a little girl's hands, hiding it in a hollow in the ground, ignoring the girl's wailing pleas. Adults who heard the crying just came over, and scolded the girl, not believing her story of "someone took my toy. Naughty children must be punished." The little girl, her hair covering her face, was locked alone in a shed in the summer afternoon, and someone's voice echoed, "No one will believe you." Selene sat clutching the toy, sobbing, "I just thought it was a joke, just a stupid challenge. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." When Imogen and Dorian returned, they saw Selene sitting in the tent, trembling uncontrollably, her eyes blank as she clutched the old rabbit, mumbling incoherently. Bryce couldn't stand the suffocating atmosphere, so he shouted and ran into the forest to clear his head. His feet stomped hard on the dry leaves, leaving a long trail on the muddy ground. He was swearing as he walked, but suddenly, he heard a child's crying coming from the dense bamboo grove. "Are you acting again? I doubt you'll get anyone to fall for it." But the crying got closer and closer, a heart-wrenching whimper and sob that seeped into his bones like a chill. Suddenly, a small, icy, mud-stained hand grabbed Bryce's ankle, dragging him down into a narrow hole next to an old tree, the very place where the toy was hidden all those years ago. Thick mud clung to him, covering each finger, each bone. Bryce thrashed and cried, but the more he struggled, the more the mud filled his ankles, his chest, and then his face. In his panic, he vaguely saw a skinny little girl at the mouth of the hole, her hair matted with mud, her wide eyes unblinking. She grinned, picking up each tattered toy and throwing it down. Cars, dolls, and finally, the rabbit with the torn ear. "Want to play more? Or do you have to stay with my toys forever?" Each toy that fell was another layer of mud, silencing Bryce's screams. Finally, when it was quiet, there was only a small wet mound left, with the grey rabbit's torn ear peeking out of the mud and blood on the surface. Dorian found Bryce a few hours later, thanks to the fresh mud trail near the tree. Bryce's body was stiff and cold, his eyes wide open, his hands clutching the torn-eared rabbit to his chest, his face smeared with blood and claw marks of utter despair. Selene stood frozen, tears mixing with the dirty mud, her mouth mumbling like she had lost her mind. That rabbit, it was mine. It was also hers. Imogen stood silently, her eyes burning with suspicion fueled by fear. Was Selene just a victim of a haunting, or did she have a truly dark connection to the horrible events happening? Imogen walked over, gently taking Selene's shoulders. "Selene, what are you doing out here in the middle of the night?" Selene hugged her head, sobbing, "Don't be mad. I just wanted to play more." Dorian looked at the two of them, his face pale, not daring to get any closer. Night fell thick and heavy. Imogen lay awake, tossing and turning, and every now and then she heard the mumbled whispers coming from the direction of Selene's tent. It sounded like two people talking, but it was only Selene. Each time she peeked out of the tent, a cold gust of wind would blow in, catching the shadow of Selene sitting at the water's edge, whispering to the invisible space in front of her. A dark, ominous red sunset lingered over the island. On an old stone slab near the old fire pit, the toy box lay alone, On the outside of the lid there were bloodstains and a crudely carved message. "Whoever takes my toys will stay on this island forever." The wind howled through every crack in the rocks. Imogen stood silently, her eyes wide with fear, her hands trembling as she clutched the hem of her shirt. Only she, Dorian, and Selene were left, tightly pulled into a spiraling vortex with no way out, where the past and present could no longer be separated. The rain started to fall in a drizzle as Imogen, Selene, and Dorian returned to the camp, their minds and bodies exhausted and covered in mud after Bryce's cold death. Thick clouds crept over the treetops, the sky turned dark, and the wind blew in gusts, shaking the tent roof and scattering rotten leaves onto their dirty clothes.
They frantically searched for the radio. All they heard was a strange whistling sound, repeating like the breath of a monster trapped in the radio waves. Imogen plugged her phone into the charger, and the screen just flashed a red battery icon before turning off completely. Dorian was irritable and shouted, "Everything's broken. It's crazy to stay here." He grabbed his flashlight, stuffed a pocket knife into his backpack, his body shaking with fear but his voice sharp. "I'm going first. If you want to die, just sit and wait." Imogen grabbed his shoulder, trying to stop him. "Dorian, there's a storm out there. No one can survive." Dorian violently shook her hand off and walked out into the rain that was churning like a rough sea. Selene was silent, her eyes fixed on the thundering darkness outside the tent, her lips twitching with soundless whispers. The wind howled, and lightning flashed across the sky. Dorian hurried into the forest, rain pouring down his hair, his eyes stinging from the water. Suddenly, amidst the gusts of wind, he heard a child's laughter echoing, sometimes giggling, other times a faint whisper right next to his ear. "Damn it, who's messing with me? If you want to play, come out here." The only reply was a small shadow flickering in and out between the tree trunks. Dorian chased after it, his flashlight beam swinging wildly, each slippery step pulling him deeper into the dark forest. Suddenly, right by his ear, a tiny whisper came, "It's your turn to chase now." In front of him, the ground opened up, and Dorian stumbled and fell into a ditch filled with rainwater. He thrashed, his arms and legs tangled in thick vines that tightened like small arms. He crawled, mud covering his face, all of it bringing back the suffocating feeling of the chasing game from his childhood, where Selene had cried after being left behind in the forest. The more he struggled, the tighter the gap became. When his head got caught on a bent branch, his neck got stuck, and Dorian shrieked. A loud crack, the vine snapped like a trap, the branch whipped past, and Dorian's neck broke cleanly. Blood spread, mixing with the freezing rainwater, and everything was submerged in the swirling darkness of the storm and the laughter of a child. The wind battered the tent, and Selene sat huddled on the glistening wet grass, her hands trembling as she clutched an old cloth she had found near the ravine. A strange lingering scent made her feel delirious. A fragment of memory suddenly exploded. When she was little, Selene was often ostracized by other children. Dorian, her older cousin, who always led the cruel games, used to tease Selene and her best friend, a small little girl who always had a red bow in her hair. Once during a chasing game, Dorian pushed her into a tree and instigated, "Let's play kidnapping, hide her well." In a fit of anger and jealousy, Selene shoved her friend hard into a puddle of mud nearby, covering her mouth with both hands to stop her from crying loudly. When she let go, it was too late. The child stopped breathing, her terrified eyes trying to blink one last time, and then never opening again. Selene bolted up from the memory, throwing up right outside the tent. Imogen witnessed it, stunned and speechless in her mind. The cries and the words, "I just wanted to play more," echoed. Afternoon descended, and the campfire flickered under the tangled shadows of the trees. Imogen nervously stepped into the tent to get her jacket, and found a small figure curled up in the darkness. "Selene, are you okay?" She lightly touched the figure's back, only for the figure to turn around, its face a swollen infant's face, the skin grey and cold, the eyes as black as a pool of water, its lips forming a pale smile. Imogen screamed, backing away, her hand clutching the edge of the tent in a useless attempt to hold on. The child's voice whispered, "You know who did it. You've known for a long time." The shadow disappeared with the sound of the wind, leaving behind a small strand of hair with a worn red bow on her jacket, wet with rain like bloody mud. Night fell, and the small campfire was starved by the wind, making the embers flare up with red dots. Selene sat close to the light, her hands on her bowed head, her eyes vacant, no longer seeing the present or the past. Imogen sat far away, clutching the red bow, her chest heaving with silent, painful waves, her mind dizzy between the truth and the supernatural she had just witnessed. High up in the canopy, in the dense rain, a small shadow with hair tied in a red bow was flying, a muddy doll in its arms, its legs swinging back and forth. Its eyes were fixed on the faint circle of light below, both childishly playful and tragically heartbreaking, a suffocating knot on every corner of the living's memory. After Dorian's death, the storm ended as abruptly as if someone had flipped a switch in the heavens. The pale moonlight pierced through the remaining mist, and the forest of the island was unusually quiet, every movement slowing down, suspended in an air heavy with waiting. Selene sat with her knees hugged to her chest by the fire, her face like someone who had just recovered from a long fever. Her eyes were dry, her lips tightly pressed, her voice hoarse. "Imogen, I have to go there. Alone." Imogen grabbed her friend's shoulder, her gaze trying to hold on to the last bit of hope. "I'm coming with you. We're not splitting up anymore." Selene shook her head, trying to smile. "I have to face this alone. You stay here. You have to tell everyone what happened." She stood up, trembling as she held the old cloth that was soaked with tears from so many memory outbursts and the muddy doll, the last remaining evidence of the chain of guilt, of the island's lost soul. The moonlight guided Selene as she quietly made her way to the rotted old tree, below which was a patch of cracked dry mud. The strong wind had stopped, and there was only the rustling of leaves under her feet. She sat down, her hands gently stroking the ground. It felt as if she was comforting a small, forgotten soul. A shiver ran down her spine as the memory flooded back. Once, Selene, a little girl who was always silently jealous of her friend for being praised and cherished, had purposely invited her friend to play hide-and-seek, leading her deep into the forest. In a moment of blind rage, Selene pushed her friend into a mud puddle, covering her mouth with both hands when the friend cried for help. The child's eyes were wide with despair. By the time Selene let go, all that was left was a series of quick breaths, then silence. She ran back to the camp, her tears mixed with mud and fear, which turned into a haunting that lasted for years. Adults later concluded that it was an unexpected accident, a mysterious stain that had never been unearthed in Selene's memory. The wind died down and the mist cleared. Everything became like a waterlogged dream. The ground under Selene's feet suddenly became soft, pulling her down into the cool mud, the smell of rot and decay spreading through her throat. She opened her eyes, this time from within the body of the child from all those years ago. Each breath was choked, every sound turned into the gurgling of water. She saw herself, the young Selene, approaching with a jealous look in her eyes and lips pressed together as if about to cry. Each gesture, each jealous word, each push, each slap, Selene was forced to experience them, not from the position of the perpetrator, but from the fear and despair of the victim. "Don't leave me, Selene. Don't cover my mouth." The feeling of burning skin, the coldness, the stupor, repeated again and again, each time more powerful, like a wave that never stopped on her small body, which was trembling with convulsive fits. Selene cried out, desperately calling for help, but her cries were choked in the mud. The scene shattered, every fragmented memory dissolving, then coming back together as a permanent picture of an unnamed pain. In the ghostly reality, the child's soul walked closer. Its eyes were pitch black, deep as a well, with no trace of childish light. "You will stay here, with me." Selene, now only able to beg, cried and slapped her hands down on the cold mud. Everything was absolutely silent, without even an echo. From the mud, a tiny hand began to emerge, reaching, clutching, the blurry shadows of her old friends, faceless, cold, quietly lining up around her. In the middle of the mud, a dead tree shot up, its vines coiling around Selene's neck, tightening gradually, lifting her and hanging her in the space of memory, just like the swing game from all those years ago. But this time, no one was playing with her, only Selene swaying alone in the haunted forest, the darkness and the guilt crushing the last bit of humanity within her. She didn't die from a broken neck, but from being trapped in a memory with no way out, forever becoming a part of the curse. A sharp shriek echoed through the forest, making Imogen jump. She ran in a panic, her feet brushing against the dry leaves, stopping dead when she found what was under the rotten tree. Selene was hanging limply from a vine, her face turned up, pale white towards the sky, her eyes wide open even in death. Below her feet, on the tree trunk, was a line of blood oozing from a fresh cut. She remembers now. The muddy doll lay silently on the ground, the old cloth covering her face like a shroud for all the tragedies that had passed. Imogen knelt, her fingers tracing the hard, dry ground, tears falling onto the damp mist, her heart both panicked and bitter, knowing she was the only one left to tell this story.
Imogen was discovered by a forest ranger team after many days of struggling to survive in the woods, her eyes vacant, her back bent under the weight of her living nightmares. No one else besides an old police officer was willing to sit and listen to the whole horrible fairy tale she told. 15 years ago, a little girl also went missing there. No one ever found her body. After returning home, Imogen locked her doors for the entire rainy season. In the dim light of her bedroom, on a glass shelf, the doll made of hardened mud, its hair tied with a red bow, sat forever like a memory that would never rot away, even as the world outside withered.
There are some childhood games we think we've forgotten, but for some people, the price of that game is a whole life. They don't get to grow up. If you've ever ignored a plea, ever abandoned someone just because we're still kids, then please remember, the scratches on a child's soul will never heal on their own. They just wait for it to get dark enough to come back. If this story made your heart skip a beat, please like, comment on how you feel, and share it with someone who once told you, what do kids have to be sad about? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our next terrifying lullabies. We'll see you again on a rainy night on the Whisper Horror channel. And if tonight you hear the creaking of a swing somewhere outside your yard, pray that you've never taken anyone's toy